before I start to tell you a little bit about George Bloch, I don't know anybody who hasn't got one of these. Could I trouble you please now to put your hand on your mobile phone? Once you put your hand on your mobile phone, then take it out and tell us all that it's switched off. Because if it's not switched off, you know that now is the time it's going to go off. Or in my case, if I'm standing up in court, then is the time it's going to go off. And I've only remembered to turn it off now. So please turn your mobile phones off, turn your pages off, turn your bleepers off, and if you're using an MP3 player, you don't really need to be in here at all. George Bloch was born in 1920 in Vienna. You wouldn't believe it to look at him now. He's as sprightly as any 50-year-old, and certainly as this 50-year-old. And George spent his first school days up to the end of 1936 in Vienna, where he went to a good private school, good public school, I'm sorry, and then went to England to study at a college for shoemakers, but not just any shoemakers, it was a college for the sons and daughters of owners of shoe factories and their chief managers of those factories. Going back to Vienna in 1938, just a very unfortunate time. George and his family then had to leave. They fled to England as refugees in a matter of 2 years, going from being a very wealthy, established, George likes to say comfortable, but I pried a little and they weren't comfortable, they were wealthy. A wealthy family, cultured, very assimilated. They had their Jewishness stamped upon their passports when they lost them for the first time. They were given new German passports, and they fled as refugees with 5 Deutschmarks each to England. George chafed at the restrictions of being penniless in England, and at the age of 18, he went to live in the Far East. On his own, he left his family and went to Shanghai, where he lived through the war. And in 1947, George came via a couple of places to Hong Kong. He didn't stay very long in Hong Kong. He then went to Tokyo, lived in Tokyo for 5 years, and came back from Tokyo to Hong Kong in 1955. I think that's right, isn't it? 55, I've done my homework. If I can read my own writing, I'll be well ahead. And then, having lived in Japan until 1955, came back to Hong Kong. George says because he wanted to be completely free. And I think you'll find as you listen to George this evening, being completely free is one of the themes of what's been a very successful life so far. Everybody's heard of George Bloch from a distance for his philanthropy and for his business success, and of course for his great collection of art. What you haven't heard is how the man came to be in that position and what made him the man he is today. And hopefully tonight in 40 minutes we can try and give you a flavour of that. So George, most people only have one nationality. You've had 3.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was Austrian, but when Hitler came, we had to become German.
Yeah.
And eventually, after the war, I was naturalized, but ended up with a British overseas passport, which is like a nothing. And very luckily was able to get my Austrian nationality back.
It's interesting now, with your Austrian passport, you can live in Britain, but with your British passport,
it's
you
wonderful.
cannot.
When I arrive with my Austrian passport in Britain, I go straight through. If I arrive with my British overseas passport, I have to queue up and fill forms in.
So that's we don't realise, those of us who've been born post-war, the effects of great national changes. You know, we've lived in peacetime, but you've had the effects of war and great political upheaval affect your life in many ways.
Absolutely.
When you had a place of refuge in England in 1938, one would have thought that, like so many people and families that came from Europe, including a lot of Viennese Jews who settled in London, for example, one would have thought that you would have stayed. I mean, you came with your mum, right?
Yes, my mother and my sister.
And your sister Edith,
Yes,
who's roughly 2 years younger than you.
2.5 years younger.
So you were 18, she was 16. Why does an 18-year-old go off to live in Shanghai, steerage?
Well, I tell you, when I lived in England, in Northampton, because I went to a shoe industrial school, Northampton was the center of the shoe industry, and all my friends were sons of owners of factories and so on, and I was invited every weekend to stately homes. When I came back as a refugee, the people were terribly nice to me, continued to invite me, but I couldn't even afford to bring them flowers or chocolates. And not only that, they gave me a care package to go home with. And I decided I was too young to have people to be nice to me. So I wanted to leave, and I thought Shanghai was a place you could leave for quicker, so I went to Shanghai.
But your Edith was in school. She was 16. Was she in school, or had she left school?
No, she had left school.
Your mother, she had to work.
That's right.
She was sewing.
She started making artificial flowers and became quite successful in this. And my sister started doing hats.
And how could an 18-year-old boy, these were the days when the age of majority was 21, how could you run off to Shanghai?
I didn't run off. I went on a hunger strike because my mother didn't want me to go. And probably she took me off the hunger strike a bit too early. It would have done me a lot of good. But I went to Shanghai.
You went to Shanghai. And you said Shanghai was a place you could go with least fuss.
Well, there were no requirements for any visa or anything. All you had to do is buy a ticket and go there and get off.
That was it?
That was it. No passports, no questions asked.
No passports, no questions asked. How did you get there? I know, obviously, no planes.
On the Italian steamer steerage.
An Italian steamer steerage, which went through via Italy?
Yes, it left from Venice and went on through the Suez Canal and Bombay and Hong Kong and eventually Shanghai.
Yes. How long did it take?
About a month.
A month. And did you have a porthole? A window?
I don't think there were many windows in steerage. But you could always go on the deck.
So you could get out?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Did you know anybody else on board the ship?
No, but there were an awful lot of people in first class who wanted to learn English. So I was invited there to teach English and was given very good meals.
So from teaching English that you learned at the school in when you'd gone to England, you learned, or did your family speak English as well at home?
My family didn't speak English at home, but they spoke English, and I'd actually been to England a couple of summers before that already for summer holidays.
Before the school?
Before the school, so my English was probably more fluent than today.
And then, so already there was although there was a compulsion, literally a financial compulsion to be in steerage, you were spending your time as much as you could through the medium of language with people who weren't in steerage, with people with money.
Exactly.
And when you got to Shanghai...
But people didn't have any money either, by the way, because as they left Europe, they were allowed to spend their money on a ticket, but they weren't allowed to take any money out, so nobody had money.
Was this ship, everybody that was going to Shanghai and Hong Kong and Bombay, they were leaving because they had to leave?
I would say the majority, not all. There were a few Indians, but the majority were European refugees.
When you got to Shanghai, no passports, no rules at all.
No.
But also no friends?
No.
Nobody?
Nobody.
So where did you stay when you got there?
Well, when we got off the ship, the committee in Shanghai, which was very active, took us to a camp. And I spent the first night in the camp there.
Yeah.
And then I figured camps are not the right thing for 18-year-olds. So I moved to a disused synagogue in the center of Shanghai, an ex-Sephardic synagogue. which had a mikveh, but it was a disused one, so it was quite pleasant to stay there. I stayed there for about probably a couple of weeks.
With some other people who had nowhere else
Very
to
few other people, because very few people discovered there was such a thing. I think lots of people like to stay in the camp. They got food there, they were looked after, so they didn't really want to move to a synagogue. It wasn't a synagogue anymore.
When you got there, you had no job.
No.
And it was suggested to me, and other people may have heard the story, we might as well put it to rest now. It was suggested to me that you worked selling things as a peddler when you first got to Shanghai.
I did that at no time whatsoever.
You didn't want to, did you?
I didn't want to.
And
I
you didn't.
was perfectly happy giving English lessons in exchange for lunch and or dinner.
Yes.
So that, but I never wanted to be a peddler. A job like that was offered to me very kindly.
Yes.
But I didn't want that because I felt that in future that might not sort of be the best thing on the CV.
But the CV actually came to your rescue, what CV you already had, because you met somebody who had something to do with the Boy Scouts.
Well, I was always very active in the Boy Scouts already in Vienna and very much so in England. And so obviously I joined the Boy Scouts in Shanghai.
So although there were no rules, there were Boy Scouts in Shanghai.
Oh yeah, it was a Jewish troop. A Jewish school which had its own troop. And
You're now a working young man
I
at
know, but you
19.
didn't have to be in school, you could be a scout master, well, looking after the others. So anyhow, what happened was one of the big shots in the scouts asked me to have a notice put in the newspaper, the North China News, and when the meeting took, about a certain meeting, and when the meeting took place, nobody was there. And he was very upset that they never printed the notice, and felt that I was very negligent. And he called up the newspaper and he said, "This is Sandy Gordon." He was the head of Wheelox at that time. "Could you please put this following notice?" And they said, "Certainly." And he says to me, "You see how easy it is?" I said, "Yeah, if I'm the head of Wheelox, it would have been probably easy for me too." When I said George Bloch, they paid no further attention. I said, "Not only that, I can't even get a job, so what do you expect from me?" And he then helped me to get a job.
That was very nice of him, and indeed, that although he helped you get a job, you started doing some trading for yourself as well. I think sometime during your period in Shanghai.
Yeah, but that was after the war broke out.
That's after the war broke out. So at this time, you had a job, but was there any money in it, George?
Very little. I came to the manager and who didn't want me, and he said, "Bloch, let me tell you one thing." He said, "I don't need you, I don't want you, and I'm going to get rid of you as soon as I can." And I was always grateful to him for saying that to me, because I figured I'm on my own.
Yes.
So I went through all the correspondence in the office and looked for things that had been offered to them and that they hadn't done and did them. So I earned my salary, and
He didn't fire you.
no, it was very good. As a matter of fact, it was the only director in Hong Kong was the head of Lo Bingham, which is now KPMG, and all the other directors were in Hong Kong and Singapore. And he called me in one day and he said, "Bloch," he said, "we're very happy with what you're doing." I figured, well, now maybe I'll get an increase which will allow me to take the tram both to the office and back again. And he said, Mr. Malcolm, who was Malcolm, Mr. Malcolm asked me to reward you, and you will be allowed to put your name on the door. Well, I was so pleased with that. How could you ask for an increase on this?
So there was still no money in it. So if you had to take the tram one way and walk home, what time were you getting home of an evening from this
Probably
office?
7 o'clock, 7:30. That didn't matter.
But Shanghai was a lively place for a young man.
Yeah, you had the money.
And George, I'm sure you managed to arrange your finances a little.
Well, let's put it this way, I'd rather walk and have some money to go out on a Saturday night than anything else.
Now, social life outside the office, a Jewish scout troop, so clearly some involvement with the Jewish community at this point.
Oh, yes.
Which Jewish community? Because Shanghai is very fragmented.
Most of the Russian Jewish community. I liked it very much, and I joined the Jewish club as early as I could, and had lots and lots of friends.
So a busy social life, even though no money.
No money, but social life was good.
Yes. And
At 18, you don't need money.
well, I can't remember myself. It's a long time ago. But
The great advantage was I had no obligations. If I didn't have any money, if I didn't have anything sort of, there was nobody who had not to eat because I didn't have any money. So that sort of helped an awful lot.
how did you come to meet Vivian Picciotti?
Williams is sitting right
How
over
did
there.
you come to meet Vivian Picciotti?
I
Where?
Picciotti.
Picciotti?
Yes, you're not pronouncing it.
Picciotti, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
How, you don't remember?
I don't
But
remember
this
how
lady,
I-
Vivian Picciotti, I'm sorry, I wrote it down wrongly as well as pronounced it wrongly. This lady was also in Shanghai during the
was a
war,
pretty young girl.
and and we hope to be able to persuade her to come and take Georgie's chair on another evening if she will. I'm sure we'd all like to hear what she has to say, because it'd be interesting to hear from the other side of this story.
We met at a young people's gathering. We were all going out, and I had my partner, I don't remember, George had, and we have a picture taken of that thing. Do you still have it? I've lost it.
Yes.
Yes.
It would be nice to see that, and we'll put it in our. We're starting. If anybody's got old pictures of the Jewish community here or in Shanghai, we are starting a project to being obsessive and obsessively rigorous about this. We're trying to catalogue those pictures. Please let us have them. We'll make digital copies and we'll give you your pictures back. Just contact us through the website and we'll get in touch with you. But having heard about there being lots of young people going out both ways, what happened, George, when about this time, we're now talking 39 to 41, where I think there was bombing, wasn't there? Wasn't there bombing by the Americans when the Japanese came in?
Well, just before the end of the war. No, not when at the end of the war in 46.
Did the Japanese not bomb before they invaded?
No, not really.
So,
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Ah.
All I know in my head.
so did life go on
No,
normally?
the Japanese had always been there because they were on the other side, on the Honkyu side, on the other side of the river.
Yes.
So when the war broke out, they just took over the whole thing.
How was life in Shanghai when they took over the whole thing?
If you didn't bow to the Japanese sentry on the bridge, you were hit on the head. So everybody bowed. And they didn't interfere too much. Interfere with me, they didn't interfere too much. The British and the enemy aliens, British, French, and everybody were eventually sent after about 6 or 8 months, were sent to prisoners of war camps.
Yes.
And eventually they established a ghetto where all Central European Jews had to move.
Now, I'm sure everybody here has immediately the same reaction as I have. You can't get much more Central European than Austria. You have a J stamp in your German passport, so you're a Central European Jew. How, George, did you not get sent to the ghetto in Honkyu?
I'd come to England much earlier. The regulation was all Central European refugees coming to Shanghai after 1937. And I had come to England originally the first time in summer 1935 or something. And in England there was a rule that if you were a foreigner you had to get an alien registration book. And every time you moved, every time you left, every time you came back, you had to have that stamped.
So pause a minute. If this book was right and was properly kept, you were going to the ghetto because you were an alien in Britain and you'd come and gone.
I know, but I'd come to England, so I took out the centered 4 pages from the certificate, so it showed that I'd come to England in 1935 or 36, and that I left for Shanghai in 1939.
So-
Therefore, I was not a refugee. So, free will.
Exactly. So the paper evidence that would have put you in Hong Kong was spirited away from the middle of your alien registration
Yes,
card.
so I got a certificate of exemption to prove that I do not have to go to the ghetto.
Close or what? Now, when you avoided going to the ghetto, by then I think you told me you were living in a converted garage in a French concession with some other young men.
That's right, there were three of us. There was a converted garage and it had very little sort of good things in it, but it had a bathroom and it had 2 rooms, and it was wonderful to stay there.
But you can't bring anybody home.
Well, 3 fellows can always find somewhere else.
And then you see, so the Central European Jews who didn't have your documentary advantage, if I can call it that,
Be able to cheat.
found themselves in Hong Kong. The Brits, and by now, and you had a strong affinity for the Brits who've been very kind to you as a student
That's right.
and also afterwards, were interned in camps. Now, how did you deal with that, George?
I used to, they wanted sometimes to send messages and food and, one could always get near the camp and then push something across. It wasn't very difficult.
That
It
was,
would be dangerous, but not difficult. But I felt I owed something to Britain because if they hadn't allowed me to come from Vienna to England, who knows?
who knows? So you did some of that, and I think you were still working at this point. I think you've got an interesting story for us about working for Low Bingham on a rice audit of all things. So let me just understand this correctly. You're an Austrian with a strong British affinity, working in a British